Hi, my name is Phaadi Zennaniri. I head up the sales practice on the Samsung Next platform team.
Hi, I'm Abigail Levine.
And I'm Simona Valsky.
And today we're on another episode of בתפקידי. This time we're recording it in English because we have a special guest from the US, Phaadi, who's going to talk to us about his career in sales and the opportunities that we can find in that space. Thank you very much, Phaadi. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Abigail. It's a pleasure to be with you.
We're excited.
Just as a disclosure, for those who didn't figure it out before, Phaadi works with me at Samsung Next. And that's how we came to the idea to bring him on the podcast today. So let's start with a little bit about the background. Phaadi, can you tell us a little bit, where did you start your sales career? Or maybe you started somewhere else and turned to sales. Like, how did you get to where you are today? And what are you doing today? Because you have a special role.
I'll start with maybe what I'm doing today, and then I'll give you a little bit of history of my background. So today I head up the sales practice on Samsung Next's platform team. I work with our portfolio founders and sales leaders on helping them increase customers, increase revenue. We focus on things like top of the funnel lead generation and pipeline building, the meeting to close process, post-sale adoption, expansion, retention. So we work on sales strategy, on sales process, on the tech stack, and then of course building the team so that our portfolio founders and leaders can grow and scale their companies. My background also, prior to joining Samsung Next, I was the CRO of an AI company. I built the sales organization from the ground up, including the SDRs, the AEs, the sales engineers, the customer success team, the partnerships team. Over time, I also inherited the marketing operation. In addition to my MBA, I also have a master's in computer science in software engineering. We invest in very technical products, so sometimes the deeper we get from a technical perspective, the better we're able to position a product for go-to-market. So that's generally what I'm doing today, working with founders and sales leaders pretty closely. But my background is, I would say, pretty interesting. I grew up in a family business. So my family came here when I was just 6 years old, and they had a grocery store, a cafe, kind of in the food business. So I learned a lot about customer service skills, making sure people are happy. I learned about pricing, about business operations that way. But my first, let's say, job in the real world was more in real estate. So I got my real estate license and my real estate broker's license. That taught me a lot about cold calling, prospecting, commission-based sales. You only eat what you hunt, basically. I learned a lot about contracts, really long contracts. For those of you that are involved in real estate transactions, can you imagine the fine print and the details around contracts? And, longer deal cycles, bigger investments, that kind of thing. Now, after I finished my business degree, I got my first role in a tech company. It was a sales role at a cloud storage startup. Think of a Dropbox that didn't become Dropbox, let's say, but it was a computer at that time when that space was hot. And I learned a lot about, software sales and that process there. Then I transitioned to more of an enterprise sale with a larger, bigger IBM product with a reseller or consultant that implemented a larger IBM software. And so kind of learned a lot about enterprise selling there. And then I transitioned to an enterprise social collaboration suite. Think of Jive or those social collaboration platforms, and they were starting to get big and starting to get popular. And then I went to Inventa, and I spent many years there building the sales organization from the ground up, and again, building the teams there and growing there. And then I came here to Samsung Next.
Does the company still exist?
Yeah, actually, I think they all do. My last company, though, just exited. So I'm very happy for the team and the founders there. And the others are, one is privately owned, not VC backed, so kind of bootstrapped and funded, still exists, and it's grown a lot in terms of the enterprise marketing management company. And then the cloud storage business, I still try to check on that one once in a while. I'm not sure how well it's doing, to be honest with you, but I think it still exists.
You know what I heard when you talked? So two things from my end. So one, you said so many buzzwords. So I really hope that by the end of this episode, we'll make sure that we at least cover some of them from the sales perspective. And the second is that for our listeners, we're doing this episode in English because of you. First of all, we wanted to interview you. But on the other hand, I think sales in general, and we'll talk about the difference with Israel, this is the role that you need to know English in high tech, right? Like you can't go without it. So everyone who wants to be in sales, listen to this episode in English and make sure you understand the whole thing. So let's continue. Maybe let's start to talk about a bit the different roles within the sales and how you see them.
Many times when you ask someone, what is a salesperson? What does a salesperson do? You'll get actually different answers. And sometimes what they're describing is what I would call an SDR. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And sometimes they're describing what I call an account executive. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And sometimes they're describing a customer success or a post-sale person. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So let's break those three functions down. And then there's another one, which is sales engineering, but that's more if you have a technical background, and we can address that if you want as well. But an SDR is someone that would stand for sales development rep. Their goal is to do lead generation and pipeline building. Their goal is to reach out to people either by email, by LinkedIn, by phone call, through social channels, through even in-person events. And their goal is to create meetings for the account executives or the traditional salesperson, the closer, the person that goes from the first meeting to closing and winning that business, right? And so that's the second role, is the account executive. So first role is lead gen, pipeline building, your day-to-day. And we can talk more about what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. But the AE or the account executive is the closer, the one that can get on a call, not only do discovery, but pitch, do the demo, even go into a trial or a POC process, get into a proposal or a contract and negotiation, and then close and win the deal. Okay, so that's the account executive, the closer. And then that post-sale role, which is after you win a customer, that's the customer success role. Sometimes it's called an account manager. Sometimes it's just called a post-sale or a customer success person. But that's once you win an account, how do you then build that relationship? How do you onboard them? How do you make sure they adopt, expand, and how do you retain that customer over time? So think about happiness, think about supporting them, think about upselling, cross-selling, right? The last role, again, that's the slightly technical role, is the sales engineer. So they're pre-sale. I mean, they can be post-sale too, but when I say pre-sale, post-sale, what I mean is once you sign the contract and you win the deal. So before that, that's pre-sales. Once you close the deal, it's post-sale. You can have a pre-sales engineer and you can have a post-sale engineer. Their role is, if they're pre-sale, they're customer facing, but they may set up custom demos, right? They may do some hard-coded things or an implementation or set up a POC because maybe they have very technical questions to answer, hands-on technical demos to show, or maybe answering very technical questions. They're working with the prospects' technical teams to make sure they're up and running. Post-sale, they might help in the same way, but they may help with new implementations. They may help with new onboarding, and they help. So that's more of a technical person. The reason they're still called a sales engineer is because they're customer facing. They're not behind the scenes, but they interact with the customer. So that's the sales engineer.
When we go deep dive into each of them, it will be interesting to hear from you also about the qualities that you see, like similarities between them. If I want to be an SDR or an account executive, can I be both? Can I start here and go there? Or I need a different qualities, right? In terms of the personality, not just the day-to-day. So just a thought when you talk about the deeper and the day-to-day of each role.
Sure. Yeah. So let's double click into each role just a little bit more to give you a purview into the day-to-day life of an SDR. So that would include activities like doing research and creating an account list, a list of companies that you want to prospect, right? And then within each account, maybe getting a few contacts that could be the right type of roles within that account and creating a lead list. And then from there, you would usually, again, depending on what your tech stack is, but regardless of that, the idea is you take this lead list and then you start engaging with them, reaching out to them, prospecting them, right? That's the sales development part. So it might be one or more or a combination of these channels. You may send emails, you may reach out on LinkedIn and send messages, you may call them, or you maybe create a multi-touch campaign and have a combination of that. You may meet with them in person if you want to go visit them, right? There's no limitation in terms of the channel, but the goal is you go from research to account list to lead list to then engagement. And there might be some personalization, right? Of course, looking at how to make your message more personal, how to reach out to them. But the goal is to then reach out, connect with them, sometimes have a little bit of a dialogue or small conversation, and then set up a meeting, ideally for your AE or your closer. So that's the day-to-day life of an SDR. They're researching.
Padi, are there the executors or the strategy behind it? So they need to think how to write, how to tackle this, which campaigns, or they're mainly the executors?
They're mainly execution, but if they're really good at what they do, then what happens is they start taking on the strategy part and then they start growing in their role, right? They either will maybe grow and take on a team or grow into an AE. And we could talk about the path, right? Because many SDRs, it's usually an entry-level role into sales and into a, let's say, a tech company. And a lot of it is kind of day-to-day repetitive work. It's still meaningful and fulfilling, but it's just a different type of work. And that's usually a path into, again, leading an SDR team or going into becoming an AE, which is a sales person that's a closer.
Okay, so let's move on to the closer.
Okay, the closer, what they do, let's call it the meeting to close process. Okay. So they will be the ones that take the meetings, meet with the prospect. They'll do qualification. They'll kind of ask the right questions. That's what's called discovery and qualification. They also usually pitch the solution. So think of the slide deck or think of the demo, which is a walkthrough of the product. So a combination of the slides and the demo. And then if there's interest from the prospect, they're also responsible for moving the prospect along the sales process. So usually what would come next if there's interest is some sort of evaluation process, right? Think of a trial, a POC, a pilot, if that exists, right? If that doesn't exist, then their goal is to just close the deal. Yeah. But most software companies, most B2B sales, or any sale that has a component of B2B in it, has this evaluation step. So their goal is to then get folks into an evaluation and have a successful evaluation. And that includes, setup, onboarding, training, sometimes working with maybe a sales engineer or potentially even customer success on that part. And then once they have a successful evaluation, the key is to get through the proposal, the negotiation of pricing and terms, and closing the deal, which is literally signing the contract.
Is there a hierarchy in the account executive? Do you have those that do like more making sure you have the right prospects and then you deliver like the closing to somebody more senior, or usually they do it end to end?
Oh, that's a good question. Depends on the nature of your team, but normally an AE should be capable of taking it from meeting to close. If they're not, they're probably more of an SDR or a post-sale person, right? But if you can't go from meeting to close, now you might have different segments. Mm-hmm. This is maybe a senior AE that focuses on enterprise accounts. This maybe is a junior AE that focuses on SMB or mid-market. And so you can segment the world. You can segment by geography. You can segment by customer type. You can segment by industry, right? Maybe this salesperson has a background in health tech. So you want them to handle all the health tech conversations. This person comes from fintech. So if you have banking or financial services companies, they know a lot about that domain, so they're better suited. So you can segment the world, but an AE generally has to be capable of going from that first meeting to a closed won deal.
It's interesting what you're saying first, because from my startup, I know that exactly, like dealing with enterprise or SMBs or small startups. But what you're saying about the background is interesting for our audience as well, because they all come from different audience. And we always tell them when they, reach out and like, I want to move to high tech, and we tell them, okay, you're a lawyer or you're a doctor or whatever you come from, take this. This is your advantage. This is your value, right? And take it and kind of use it in your new role. So if you want to be a salesperson and you're coming from the healthcare, then this is exactly the connection. So it's super important what you're saying. And it's just, what we are always the message that we're aiming to tell them as well.
Okay, so we have another role that we didn't cover in terms of
the customer success role, the post-sale role. Now, customer success can start pre-sale. So for example, let's assume your pilot or your trial or your evaluation is very hands-on. It requires maybe onboarding or training, right? Usually someone from the CS or customer success team can be a part of that, right? But then traditionally also, once the deal closes, there is a transition, right, between the handoff of an AE to a CS person. Now, sometimes before transactional deals, that can be right away, right? We close the deal now, tomorrow you're in the hands of a CS person. But as you move upstream to mid-market enterprise deals where you've spent a lot of time building relationships, that transition period is longer. It can be weeks, it can be months before you do a transition to CS, because as everyone knows, the relationship and the trust is a big reason why companies make purchasing decisions. And so the last thing you want to feel is that the person you trust or your partner, let's say, in the company has just handed you off without a proper transition and building of trust with that next person. So that's CS. What they do on a day-to-day basis, they're doing adoption, expansion, retention, right? Their goal, their objective is, one, making sure customers are using the technology or the software. They're happy, they're supported, they have someone that they can kind of communicate with and escalate issues to. And again, the CS person can sometimes work closely with, again, another dedicated team, the support team. They can also work with the engineering team if there are technical issues, and they can also work with the product team to give them feedback from their customers about new use cases or expanding capabilities of the product. So, but their objective is to make sure the customers are happy, they're onboarded, they're happy, they renew their contracts, right? That's retention, and that they grow. So that's the upselling and cross-selling usually. And again, there's sometimes an overlap between AEs and CS about who does what on an upsell or a cross-sell. But CS makes sure they're happy. They're onboarded, they're happy, they're renewing, and they're growing, basically.
So just for our audience on the stop, like upsell is to sell additional services, right? Or bigger offerings, I'd say.
Yeah, so think of upsell versus cross-sell. Upsell just means selling more of the same thing. So let's say number of users. Now you're at 10 users, let's sell you 15 users. That's an upsell. A cross-sell would be selling you something different, a different feature, a different product line, a different, suite of services. So upselling is more of the same thing. Cross-selling is selling you something that you didn't already purchase yet.
Yeah, so and we highly recommend that if we mention a word that you're not familiar with, you can always Google it. We always recommend that. One thing we did not mention is we're talking mainly about B2B companies, companies that are selling to other companies and not selling to end users. Usually we don't see salespeople within the tech industry for B2C, for business to consumer type of businesses. Am I right?
Generally speaking, but there are many B2C products that you end up speaking with someone that then converts you to a sale. So if you have that type of B2C product, you'll see it. If you're purely self-service, you're all engaging, it's all digital, and you're engaging on the website and signing up, you won't see it. But there are some B2C services where you dial in or you schedule a call to speak with someone. They may use a different name, a consultant, a specialist, or, but that's really a salesperson. Okay. If you're handling a conversation to close it, you're a salesperson.
And just another term, B to SMB is a business that sells to small businesses, basically. Small, yes. Medium businesses. What is a good educational path to become a good salesperson, in your opinion?
I mean, one obvious answer could be study business, right? But the reality is I've seen great salespeople from all sorts of backgrounds, right? From communications backgrounds, from marketing backgrounds, from business backgrounds, from engineering backgrounds, from political science backgrounds, right? From history backgrounds. When we talk about the qualities of a salesperson, I think you'll see why that's the case. It's less about necessarily your educational experience, let's say at a university or what you studied formally, and more about certain qualities and characteristics of a person. I would say if I'm looking to hire a salesperson, so oftentimes people are looking at skill set rather than the qualities of the person, right? So they're looking at things like, oh, how do they do lead gen? How good are they? Do they know how to follow up? Can they present, right? Do they know how to negotiate? So what they're doing is they're evaluating skills, but skills, you can teach someone those skills, right? The qualities that you should be looking for that are hard to teach are things like intelligence, right? Their mental capacity. How articulate are they? Their verbal and written communication skills. Their diligence, so their work ethic, their discipline. Their passion, so do they care and are they motivated enough, right? And then are they curious, which means do they listen? Do they ask insightful questions? So if you have intelligent, articulate, diligent, passionate, curious, you've got yourselves the recipe for an amazing salesperson across any of those roles that I just mentioned, by the way.
So if you're looking for someone, what would the hiring process look like? How will you find out whether or not he has this or she has these qualities?
Yeah, so oftentimes I consult and advise our founders and leaders to design an interview process that aims at addressing each one of these qualities. Yes, you should address the skill set, and you should look at minimum, if you want a certain degree of education, if you want X number of years experience, those are kind of basics for those that apply to you. But what you're trying to evaluate are those 5 key qualities that I just mentioned. So you design an interview process to do that from your screening call, from your initial screening, when you're having a conversation. These days we're used to Zoom calls, which is great because you can see body language, you can see tone, but it's also nice when you can't see them and you just hear them speaking, right? So that you can tell a lot about how they can communicate in English, let's say, or in any language that you're dealing with. So it starts in the screening call. And then when you have a deeper dive call, let's say on Zoom or in person, you're now asking questions that get at these issues. right? You can tell a lot about their follow-up, about their written and verbal communication. How do they email you? How do they speak on an interview? Do they listen? Do they ask the right questions? Again, it can be a very simple process, especially for those that like to involve other team members in their interview process. Assign one of these qualities to each person with a relevant set of questions so that at the end you can have some sort of scorecard, a simple 1 to 5 on each one of these categories, right? Or if you want green, yellow, red. If you get a red anywhere, I would say they're not going to make a good fit.
I like the fact that you said structure the process. Many times you find you meet companies and there's no process. It's like messy. They're like trying to iterate and understand like what's the process like. So it's very important to build the process in advance. And you don't do the sell me the pen trick anymore. Like you don't do that, or
well, you can ask a critical thinking question, right? About but no, I mean that's part of the interview process, right? That's called the exercise. So the exercise could be, you either give them your own product or solution, you make them do research and pitch it, or you say, look, I'm of the type that would say, I don't want you to invest so much work before we're actually working together. Why don't you sell me what you've already sold before? Just do that. Show up with something you've already sold before if you have a couple of years experience, and let's go there, because you should know this space, you should know this domain. So when I ask you the questions from an interview process standpoint or from a pitch or a role-playing scenario, I don't want you to have the excuse of you don't know the domain or you don't know my service, right? So in that example, you'll get a lot about their skills and their negotiation.
And you have a lot of experience working with Israelis. So how should Israelis approach this process, or what are Israelis like should improve in their sales process? Because I know Israelis are very like direct, like you don't like do the small talk. They're like, Israelis are like getting to you and like it's like a bazaar, like trying to sell you in your face. What do you see? How do you see Israelis sales skills?
Yeah, so I think when I work with many companies across the board, not just Israeli companies, here are some common patterns that you should watch out for, right? You hired a salesperson just because your friend or network recommended them. You have to vet those 5 qualities, even if your best friend, even if your advisor, your investor recommended them, right? And so one thing is, it's a tight-knit community. We all know each other. Here's a person, I trust them, go. Not necessarily the case, right? So that's one thing you should be mindful of. The other is, this person's been working in healthcare for 20 years. Therefore, they're going to be great at my company pitching my product. That's one thing. The other is they're going to bring all their leads and their prospects with them. That's the other mistake. So you probably hear that all the time.
Never happened.
And if you want to waste a few months of your time, like go with that approach, right? And then the other example would just be maybe not knowing what to look for actually in the characters. You're looking for skills and not qualities. And what happens is you find good, because everyone can, how should I say, everyone can wing the skills in a temporary moment, right?
Yeah.
Everyone can follow up properly to your email. Everyone can be very kind to you and pretend like they care and ask you a bunch of questions in that first meeting or whatever it is. But those qualities, when you test them out properly, you can't fake it. Like you either have those qualities or you don't. And if you do a good job of testing them, you'll see very quickly. It's better to do a little bit more diligence upfront and hire the right people than it is to go through the churn and burn process of going through a lot of AEs and not figuring out why it's not working out for you.
And if I'm asking the other way around, if an Israeli wants to become a good salesperson, what should they improve in their sales pitch, manners? Like, what do you see that is like kind of across the board?
So one is messaging, like the way you communicate about something, right? So like you said, sometimes maybe you're very direct in your approach, but sometimes it needs a little bit of a softening of the edges when you share something, or if someone has an objection, right, to your product or your solution, or if you make a statement that is maybe overemphasizing the value of your company. These kinds of things, at least in the American sales experience, they stand out because they're not common in our day-to-day language. So those kinds of harder, not saying you can't say hard statements, but think about the delivery or the package of the statement and not just the statement itself, let's say.
Very American answer.
It is very American, but you're asking about, the nuances that stand out.
But he's right.
So.
Like it's a yes or no kind of approach we have in Israel, rather than it's a relationship, and maybe I get a no now and I can get a yes later. So I have to think about long term rather than winning this deal. It's like you have to think more like strategically long term and also communicate this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily always a problem. I'm just saying certain scenarios require the finesse and certain scenarios don't require it. Just get a better sense of when it makes sense and when it
I think it's also like know maybe who and when is the right person to put up front the customer. Usually, you start the deal and then you get to some tackle or some point when you need to put someone else. So it's also like, it's a whole process, as you said. You need to read the customer. So if you need someone more technical, or if you need to bring one of the founders of the management, and so it's not only you. And I think it's also important to understand that you need to work somehow in a team. But you tell us, is it very individual, or you need to know how to work as a
teamwork? Yeah.
Well, what happened early on, the founder's doing everything, right? So early on, it's one thing. By the way, this is another common problem. You're looking for what I call the full stack salesperson. You're trying to hire the unicorn, which is the SDR and the AE and the CS person and the sales engineer. That's very rare. So you have to know what you're looking for. Do you need the AE? Do you need the closer? Or do you need the lead gen person? Look, these days, people will take anything, right? Like if people need a job, they'll do everything. But ideally, from a theoretically ideal or most efficient standpoint, SDRs do lead gen, closers close, CS people do post-sale. In the beginning, you can get away with my first sales hire, my first few, they're doing lead gen, they're doing everything, they're doing account management. But if you stay in that mindset, you're going to have a hard time growing your sales team and your sales operation. So that's another area that I do see, by the way. It's common to founders in general, right? Because founders wear all the hats, therefore they think everyone on my team needs to wear every hat, and it's not true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Unless you need to be, you can't, that system breaks down at some point. And a full stack salesperson, so once you're fully busy, something will suffer. Either lead gen will suffer or post sale will suffer. You pick your poison, but something's going to suffer. And so you have to make sure that your lead gen never suffers, and then your closers close, and then CS comes in and takes over.
Yeah. So it's also good for you as looking for a sales role to understand where in the sales stack you want to be. If you're more like a junior, or you want to be in the closer part, or you want to do post sale. So that's a good question to ask yourself if you're looking for such a role.
If I want to be a salesperson, let's say me, what do I need to know about it? Like, what is the main things? We can talk about the pros or the cons, or in general, what do I need to know if I want to be a salesperson about this role?
So I think it's important to know what we talked about already. That's like foundational, right? What does the role do? What's its purpose? What does the day-to-day look like at a high level? What are the qualities, maybe some of the skills? But honestly, I think the overlooked part, or maybe oftentimes not treated with enough value part of a sales role is the quota, or the company's success generally falls on your head, right? So it's a high pressure job. And sometimes if you're not in sales, you don't understand that pressure, because your job's not on the line if the company necessarily doesn't hit their numbers. Because let's say you're in product or you're in marketing, you're doing your job and you're executing well, and then all of a sudden the numbers aren't hit, it's sales' fault, right? So there's a high pressure nature to sales that you should be aware of. But with that pressure comes the respective risk reward benefit, which is higher comp plans if you actually hit your numbers, right? It's very entrepreneurial, right? Because you can build a book of business and you can grow that business. It's entrepreneurial because you're taking on a bigger risk, a lot more stress in your day-to-day to hit numbers and be on the hook for those numbers. And to some degree, there's a metaphor or an allegory to baseball, right? Which is, in baseball, if you fail 2 out of 3 times, you can make it to the Hall of Fame, right? Because if you have basically a 333 batting average, you're a Hall of Fame baseball player. Sales is very similar. If you look at a sales funnel, out of all your leads and prospects and meetings and opportunities, it's a very thin slice that closes and wins, right? And so there's a lot of rejection, a lot of no, a lot of failure, a lot of missed deals, and so if you're not good at understanding that it's a numbers game and not taking it personally, then sales is going to wear you out very quickly if you take it too personal if someone tells you no, basically.
So that's like a kind of a disadvantage. You always measured, you always like your success is like on the leaderboard of the company. Everybody knows if you're good or bad. That's quite hard. But what's the upside apart from like good compensation? What would be the upside of such a role? Maybe you travel a lot if you like
travel
the world.
Okay. If you have that kind of role, right? Maybe SDRs as much unless it's conferences. But let's just say you travel, sure. But more than that is you're customer facing. Right. So you're learning a lot about customers, about the industry you're in, about the space you're in. So that's one thing. If you like kind of relationship building and that's your personality type, it's great for that. The upside of compensation, of course, and your career path. Sales also for me, it touches every part of the business. It connects you with the engineering, with product, with marketing, with R&D, with finance, right? With accounting. Sales
and you're fighting with everyone.
well, ideally, you have a good relationship with them, right? Ideally, you build trust because that's another. Yeah, we could talk about that dynamic too, maybe in another episode. But that is actually very rewarding for me. That's part of the reason why I love sales so much, especially at the sales leadership position. Is you're working with every department and the leaders of every department because everything is pointing to sales, right? That's the indicator of traction in the market. That's the indication of growth, and everything behind that, not behind it in an order or sequence perspective, but everything that spearheads into sales is every other department in the business. So it touches everything. So that's very important.
You touched the compensation issue. Can you talk a little bit about like how usually compensation is built for a salesperson?
Yeah, so I would say generally speaking, roughly speaking, on the SDR side, so there's an on target. Your OTE is your on target earning, which means what you expect to make as a whole package. And that's divided usually for an SDR anywhere from 50-50, which means 50% base, 50% bonus or variable. That's called the variable component, to 60-40 to 70-30 on the SDR side, right? That's how it looks. On the AE side, it's usually 50-50. So if your base salary is X, your on target is 2X, basically, generally speaking. CS is a little different. Depends on how you compensate, if upselling and cross-selling is involved or not involved. But it's usually, it could be 60, 70, 80, 60, 40, 70, 30, 80, 20 in terms of base and bonus based on retention and churn metrics, right? And the growth of those accounts. So very similar structures, but AEs are the common 50-50 base variable on target.
No doubt that you can do great money.
And you're getting the bonus as like percentage of the revenues that you generate, or is it the percentage of extra revenues? Like if you like hit the target, but you hit more than expected, then you get like, is it also there's some kind of a scale there as well, usually?
On the SDR side, you're more compensated on number of meetings booked. That's like your quota or your target or to fulfill is number of qualified meetings completed per period per month, let's say. And then that normally breaks down to a rate so that if you break that, let's say 20 meetings a month is your quota, right? That's 100% of your quota. If you go beyond the 100%, there are different models out there, but you can be compensated on a per meeting number, so X dollars per meeting, or if you're 110% to target, you get X bonus, 120% Y bonus, 130%. On the AE side though, that's where the potential is very different, right? Because it is usually a percentage of sales. And you can see numbers from 10% to 15, 20%, depending on how early stage you are or how later stage, how more mature you are. And theoretically, you have what's called the accelerator. So once you hit 100% of your target revenue, once you pass that, you usually have more percentages for all that revenue above that number. So like, let's say you're at 10% and you hit 100%, between 100 and 110% of quota, you're at 15% commission. And then from 110 to 125%, you might 20% commission.
Where can you find numbers of like benchmarks? Is there like a website, like Glassdoor? Like where can you find numbers if you want to negotiate?
I think you can look at Glassdoor. I reference, so when I hired many of my sales team in the Bay Area specifically, there's a firm called Bets Recruiting. They put out the Bets Recruiting compensation guide. They're a go-to-market specialist in recruiting. They hire all these sales roles we talked about and some of the marketing positions. They put out a report every year, an annual report, but they also give you I think, insight into the different markets, right? If you're hiring a salesperson in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's a very different base salary than if you hire them, let's say, in Texas or in Miami or in the Midwest, let's say.
Yeah.
It does vary region in terms of where the base salary starts and what the compensation looks like, but the structures typically are.
We'll add a link. You share the link with us.
I have a question before we continue, because I always struggle with that. We have sales, and then the biz dev and partnerships area in the last years, they also have their quotas, right? A few years ago, biz dev or partnership were like, oh, it's nice, let's go to conferences, build relationship and things like that. But then today, they all have quotas as well, like numbers. How do you see the difference between, the sales, biz dev people and partnerships?
So normally in the trajectory of a business, you need to build what I call your direct selling capabilities first. That's your AE, that's your closers, right? You need to know how to win customers, win deals, and that's the direct selling process. When you start growing and for some businesses, right, a channel or a partner strategy makes sense earlier on, but once you're ready for partners and partnerships, it's almost like a two-tier quota. One is how many partners do you have, but then the second question is what are they producing in pipeline, right? So it's a little bit different because you don't get to control the lever as directly. So let me give an example. Let's say your company sells, I just pick any software, right? You sell software to SMBs, let's say. Then you want to partner with Intuit because they have millions of SMBs in their pipeline, let's say. And again, it depends on what kind of partner they are. Are they just a referral partner that make introductions to your services? Are they an integration partner where they're kind of branding your product together? But the idea is, what can you influence Intuit to doing for you? Like, you can't control their go-to-market. You're subject to their go-to-market, to their sales team, to their engines. So you don't have as much direct influence on that pipeline. So you may have a quota, yes, but it's usually longer term. It takes time to develop that. And it's harder to control because you have dependencies on the partner. Versus when you're selling directly, you know your conversion rates. Like, for every 10 customers I meet with, I can close Y number of customers at this potential rate. Many
times they say there's a quota, and then, I'm like, is it the same quota in terms of numbers? But what you're saying about the long term and that you rely on the partner, it's interesting. It's a different point of view. Yeah. So thank you for that.
In a way like you're mentioning, when someone says business development or partnerships, unfortunately, some people think that means like prospecting like an SDR and sales like an AE. To me, that's not the same thing. So biz dev and partnerships are about actually making relationships with companies that will be your partners that can help you in different ways. There's technology partners, strategic partners, reseller partners, referral partners, right? So there's a different set of what I call partners. And sometimes the language is...
Yeah, it's in Israel, you see it a lot, that they're looking for salespeople and they're writing business development, maybe because it sounds more attractive. I don't know why. Yes. You see it a lot. You didn't start in the tech world. You started in the real estate world, which I think is the best place for salespeople. But if a salesperson who's coming from a non-technical industry wants to shift into the tech industry, like what are the differences, or what are some tips you can give them in terms of are they doing the same work? Is it different and they have to learn something? What is the gap that they have to fill?
Of course, it depends what your background is and what you've been doing, but you have to understand the variation in these different elements. One element is what I call deal cycle length, right? So for example, if you're selling something today where you can close a deal in an hour or off of one phone call, that's very different than B2B software selling. It's very rare that you close a deal, sign a contract, and move on in an hour. So the deal cycle length is very different. So you're going from something more transactional to something more consultative and has a little bit of a process, maybe a few more steps in between. So that's one thing to factor is, what are you doing today? Are you doing something more transactional? Like even
sell in the store.
Yeah, sure, exactly. You're doing, phone sales in a retail store, right? Like you've got a bunch of customers, they're walking into all that, right? Versus, like I said, my example is real estate. The good news is that for me, that was already long. It took months to do. There was contracts, there was separate phases. So that mirrored more of a how long and how maybe complex a deal could be. So one is deal cycle length. The other is the nature of the way you build the relationship and the way the actual prospect evaluates before they make a decision, right? So maybe if it's a phone, I take a look, I already know what I want before I walk in, and I just want the best one, and give me the best price and I buy it. In software, it's a little bit different. They need to learn more about you, about your company. Why should they trust you? What are some, example customers you have? So you have to just be prepared. It's a little bit of a different evaluation process from the person doing the buying. No one just buys software after speaking to someone.
So you're more involved with the marketing department, I'd say, for example.
Well, you're more involved. You have to learn a lot about the product, about the domain, about the competitors. Those are very similar, common characteristics to sales, but sales cycle length, the way an evaluation is made to make the purchase, and then the way you handle follow-ups and the relationship, right? Again, if you're used to closing a deal in 1 or 2 calls or one transaction, that's not the same thing as scheduling another demo with another stakeholder and another decision maker, right? And then drafting a proposal and then sending it for review and then redlining with so there's just some differences inside the process, I would say. But the good news is you'll probably have the fundamental skill sets, and let's abstract those for a moment, right? Ideally, you have the ability to build rapport with your prospect, right? So whether you're walking into an AT&T store or you're on a Zoom call with a Fortune 500 executive, it's the same thing. How are you doing? Where are you dialing in from? What's the weather like? Oh, I see your son plays soccer. That's the same, right? Mm-hmm. So building rapport is the same. Discovery is very similar. Even in a fast transactional sale, the discovery of asking the right questions to understand what their pains are, what their needs are, what their desires are, that's very similar. You might need to expand your set of questions, but discovery is the same. Now, the way you pitch might be a little different, right? How you pitch a certain product in your hands is very different than how you pitch software. You normally need to talk about, your messaging has to be clear. You need to describe how it works. You need to show it. There are different ways to describe the product. So that's more like the demo. Objection handling is there for everybody. You have objections, price, competitors, features, capabilities. Just think about it. Objection handling is there. Negotiation is usually there. If you're not used to dealing with that because you have some sort of price card and it's publicly available and you have no option, that's one thing. But be ready to learn negotiation skills and how to work with that. Yeah, and then signing deals and moving forward. So lots of abstracted things common across all sales, just a different nature of cycle and prospects and movements.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that in like in tech companies, usually the sales process is also very technical. So they use a lot of software, use a lot of A/B testing and measurement, which maybe you don't have in a more old school industry, that they don't use all these tools to see conversion of calls to actual closing of deals and stuff like that.
We have some of our audience are doing like career transition, some seniors, some are juniors, and they want to enter this world. So we're usually getting a lot of questions about, should I start with a startup? Should I go for a corporate in terms of the day-to-day and in general, maybe the mentoring, the guidance. So how do you see it? Like if we want to start as a salesperson, where should we go? What's the difference?
I would say there's a few things to think about, right? We'll talk about practically, maybe how would you go about getting connected or getting the right information or getting the right path. But there are a few things to keep in mind when you come from a large, let's say, or enterprise company or a well-established brand than it is when you are working for a startup, right? First, selling for, and this, by the way, this is, again, another common mistake of founders, hiring someone with an enterprise selling background at a well-established brand, and then unfortunately not doing so well in a startup environment, and then losing 3 to 6 months of time because they couldn't fit well in the startup. Oftentimes, when you're in the bigger brand, you have brand power, right? You already have existing customers. The type of selling is different. You don't have to compete as much. You don't have to convince them to trust you, to work with you, that you'll be around in 3 years or in 5 years, right? They don't need to know the other customers you work with because maybe they know 100 companies you already work with. So the selling is a lot different. In a lot of cases, you're almost just having conversations and learning more about their needs, and then you're just kind of fulfilling the orders of what they want. In certain, of course, they're selling in enterprise cases. You're competing against other products, but in the startup world, no one knows who you are. So you have to create value. Your messaging has to be clear and precise. You have to create value. You have to demonstrate that you know the domain, you know the pain, that your solution can deliver, that your solution is real, right? You don't have to do that when you're coming from a large enterprise. Everyone knows the company, right? Folks are willing to bet their careers on making a mistake with an enterprise company than they are, we bought from startup X, Y, and Z, and then, our database got hacked and we lost X million in revenue. So folks aren't willing to put their careers on some startup technologies that are critical to the business, let's say. So just the selling environment is different. And then we talked about early on, you don't have automatic leads coming in from a well-established marketing department where, you know, your calendar's full of meetings and everyone's knocking down your door to do business with you. You actually have to go convince people to care about what you do, to be interested in what you do, to meet with you about what you do. So it's just a very different nature, right? In terms of the amount of work, the diligence it takes, the discipline it takes to make that work. It's not necessarily harder, it's just different, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're thinking sales at an established, they've got training and they've got an entire process and they have sales enablement teams and they have seminars and coaching, and you join a startup and sometimes they don't even have a Google Doc on the sales process, right? It just kind of sink or swim, figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, you're not a good salesperson. That's absolutely not true, by the way. You can have a great salesperson, and if you don't give them enough information or tools, they may not do well. If you extend the ramp time too long because you're not able to accelerate their ramp, that's going to be a problem. Okay, so that's one thing we should clear the deck on. Now, let's say you're coming from the enterprise or from the startup world and you're interested in getting into sales. I look at different slices, right? If you're looking at software, I think you should understand, if I could recommend to snap my fingers and say, look, if you could do a software development boot camp for a month or two, I would recommend it. Why? Because you learn a lot about software in a boot camp. You're not going to become a super engineer like someone who went and got a PhD in engineering. You're not. But you're going to become very acquainted very fast with the way software works, the network architecture, server architecture, the way applications work, databases work, APIs work. So you have to onboard a set of knowledge about software in general that's going to work with you at any software company, right? So you don't have to take a boot camp, but you need to do something where you learn about technology and how it works. Okay, that's one thing.
Know the product. Understand the product.
Yeah. You can learn about products by going to one product at a time, or you can go to the core and understand how software works, and it's very easy to learn about any product. So you pick the path that you want, okay?
Nice.
But you need to understand products and software. Then you need to understand sales. Like, so if there are many blogs out there that write on this. HubSpot does really well on doing marketing and sales content. SaaS, there's another resource out there. There are many resources out there to learn about sales, right? We have tools these days like Salesforce, we have Outreach.io, we have Zoom Info, we have Apollo. They are now publishing great content to equip you for sales in any of those functions, SDR, AE, customer success. So a lot of these companies are publishing great content on that so you can learn. But I would say, if you have someone in the field that's working, I think shadowing or interning or getting an entry-level role, doing what a salesperson does can accelerate your learning, very quickly. Fortunately or unfortunately, if you don't have a background in sales, when you enter into sales, you may have to maybe go backwards a step in your career to kind of enter into the sales role, right? So let me give you an example. Maybe you're a leader of, I don't know, the finance department somewhere. That doesn't make you a VP of sales when you get into sales, right? If you want to get into sales, you have to, maybe you'll be a senior AE or something, but you still have to learn. You still have to go through the process of learning sales and proving yourself as a salesperson before you think you can just kind of come in and take over the sales department.
Yeah. Many times when people do like a career transition, they have to sometimes go back their hierarchy or something in the role. So let's go to the quick questions.
Yes.
So the quick question session is that I ask a question and you have to give an answer like quickly without thinking too much. Okay. No explanation. Just So let's start. Is it more an analytical role or a creative role?
Can I say both? Or is that a answer?
Yeah, you can say both.
I think it's both. But what you'll find is it's more process oriented and engineering driven at its core. But you need the creative side to make the improvements, to diagnose it, to understand the problems, and then to create ways to improve the efficiency. But it's both.
That was a very quick answer. Is it constant stress or work-life balance?
Ooh, I think early on it's more stressful, but then later on, as you know what you're doing and you're consistent and you have a process and a system down and you're efficient, it becomes a better work-life balance.
Is it a teamwork or a solo thing?
It's both. So your day-to-day work and you control how much you put into this, how much you grow and develop, that's in your hands. But the success of your team and the success of your company as a whole is based on the team. And
last question, any community or resource other than the ones you mentioned to learn sales or to become better or to share knowledge? that you can recommend?
Yeah,
except for Samsung Next Sales Academy,
Samsung Next
of course.
Sales Workshop is good. That's a good one. That's of course with Abigail and Simona and the team for sure. Yeah, I think there are sales books, really good resources out there. So, for example, Sales Acceleration Formula, Predictable Revenue, right? Sales Management Simplified, Fanatical Prospecting, right? There are some really good sales books that can really put you ahead of the pack in terms of your understanding of sales.
Amazing. And yeah, maybe I'll say 2 words about our Sales Academy. So at Samsung Next, we put together a Sales Academy with Phaadi for sales leaders and founders of companies, where we go through the different stages of sales and we do a deep dive about how to approach them, what are the skill set, and how to plan everything. It's online on YouTube, also on our Facebook page. So you're more than welcome to watch the previous sessions or join future sessions. You can talk to me, and I'm more than happy to share links for the future sessions. So Phaadi, thank you very much. As usual, I learn a lot. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. And I look forward to learn more about sales. Maybe I'll take a book, because I think it's a good skill to have, even if you're not a salesperson as your job.
Thank you, Abigail and Simona. It was amazing, and it was a pleasure being here. And I appreciate your time and your insights on what you're doing for the startup ecosystem as a whole. So please keep up the awesome work that you do.
Thank you, Phaadi. Hope to see you soon in Israel. One day.
I would love to.
And in case you're not in our Facebook community, בתפקידי in Hebrew, or you did not check out our website, you write בתפקידי in English and you'll get to our website. We host many events and online webinars. So don't miss out. Good stuff.